What happens when a cop punches a judge in the middle of a trial and the whole country sees it live? In just 1 second. A courtroom in Houston turned into ground zero for a battle that's been boiling for decades. Judge Noelle Aragon didn't just bleed, she rose. This story is real fire. Tap like, share, and subscribe now because truth like this shouldn't be buried. Watch till the end. The courtroom wasn't supposed to be dramatic that morning. It was Wednesday, 9:45 a.m., and courtroom 4 in the Houston Federal Building had the usual stillness thick. Expectant, sterile so. The walls, pale gray and indifferent, didn't yet know they were about to become history's unwilling witnesses. A ceiling fan hummed softly above the polished oak bench. Judge Noelle Aragon had just asked a question, simple, precise, the kind that cuts deeper than it sounds. "Officer Rourke," she said, her voice firm but steady, "why does the timestamp on the video not match your statement under oath?" That was the moment the air shifted. He didn't answer right away. Officer Caleb Rourke, 6'2", white shirt rolled up at the elbows, sat back in his chair with the confidence of a man who had never truly been held accountable. His chest rose slowly, measured, like he knew eyes were on him. His face square jaw, sun-reddened skin. Thin smile had been the face of a hero in the media more than once. Medal of Valor, citizen commendations. But behind all that shine were years of sealed complaints, silenced victims, and missing footage. Noelle knew it. So did he. What no one expected was what came next. Rourke stood up, not slowly, not dramatically, but with the suddenness of someone who had snapped. The back of his chair scraped across the floor with a sharp screech that sliced through the silence. Attorneys turned. The court reporter dropped her pen. The bailiff's hand twitched toward his belt, but hesitated too late. In one brutal motion, Rourke stepped past the table, past the line that separates accused from adjudicator, and launched his fist forward. It landed with a sickening thud. Judge Noelle Aragon's head snapped sideways. Her glasses flew from her face, hitting the bench with a soft clatter. A small dark stain bloomed on her left cheekbone where the punch had landed. Time stopped. For 1 second, just one, the room was pure silence. Not even a gasp. Just the collective sound of people trying to process the impossible. A uniformed officer had just struck a sitting federal judge, and the cameras were rolling. The courtroom had been fitted with full media access that morning due to the high-profile nature of the case. There were 3 mounted angles, 2 handheld videographers, and 1 live stream camera operated by a freelance media rep. Every angle caught it. Every lens captured the blow, the blood, the sudden chaos. Noelle didn't fall. That was the part people would talk about later. She staggered. Yes, her left hand gripped the bench. Her right held the armrest, but she didn't go down. Her blood dripped onto the hardwood floor like ink staining a forgotten truth. But she stayed upright. The look in her eyes clear, sharp. Burning with something ancient was not pain. It was fury. It was disbelief. It was purpose. "Arrest him," she said, her voice low but unmistakably firm. "Right now. And keep the cameras rolling." That line would echo across the nation within minutes. It would be clipped, shared, turned into a hashtag. Keep the cameras rolling. The courtroom erupted as marshals restrained Rourke. He didn't fight them. That's what unsettled people. He didn't resist. He just stood there, nostrils flared, chest heaving, like a man who had just done what he believed he was entitled to do. His lips curled not into a smirk, but something more disturbing, satisfaction. As if he had finally told the truth without saying a word. Noelle's robe was torn slightly at the shoulder, a single thread unraveling near the seam. Blood ran down her jawline in a thin red line, but her eyes never left Rourke. Even as they pulled him back, even as her clerk handed her tissues, even as court officers whispered in panic about shutting down proceedings, she stood tall, unmoved. She took one step forward. "Let the record show," she said slowly, "that Officer Caleb Rourke struck this bench not with logic, not with evidence, but with violence. And let it be known that punch wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at justice itself. And justice does not bleed quietly." That was the moment the courtroom changed forever. Outside, within 15 minutes, national news outlets picked up the feed. Within 30 minutes, the video had been reposted to every major platform. By 10:40 a.m., the hashtag #Justice does not bleed quietly was trending #1 on Twitter. At 11, the mayor of Houston held a press conference calling the incident deeply disturbing. But the real story wasn't just the punch. It was what it revealed. Because the moment that punch landed, the public's attention cracked open something deeper. The question Judge Aragon had asked just before the assault about the video timestamp became a bomb. People started asking, why had no one caught Rourke before? Why was a man with multiple misconduct allegations still in uniform? Who else knew by noon? Old footage of Rourke resurfaced, grainy phone videos, sealed court documents leaked by anonymous sources. Reports from internal affairs never prosecuted. Victims began to speak. A former EMT, a young black student, a paraplegic veteran, names that had been dismissed, scrubbed, or buried beneath phrases like insufficient evidence and subject resisted. And still, Noelle didn't step away from the bench. She held a press briefing at 5 o'clock sharp. No tears, no rage. No, just clarity. This was not a breakdown, she said into a row of microphones. This was exposure. What broke was the illusion. What rose today was the truth. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She didn't want revenge. She made that clear. What she wanted was justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been quietly erased under the same system that had let Caleb Rourke thrive for over 15 years. As the sun set on that same Wednesday, Courtroom 4 stood empty. Blood had been scrubbed from the floor. The bench had been polished. The live stream was over. But in homes, offices, school gyms, fire stations, coffee shops, people were still watching, still talking, still stunned. 1 second, one punch. That's all it took to peel back 20 years of protection, silence, and complicity. And it was only the beginning. Because if justice can be struck in open court in front of cameras, what's happening when no one is watching? Hit subscribe, like, and share this video, because this isn't just a story. This is a warning. This is a wake-up call. And it's far from over. Blood had dried on her cheek by the time Judge Noelle Aragon returned to chambers. The cameras had stopped. The lights dimmed. The bailiffs gone quiet. But inside her, a storm churned low, ancient, wordless. Her skin still stung where Rourke's fist had landed, but the real wound wasn't the bruise. It was the silence that followed. Not a single call from the Chief Justice, no emergency statement from the U.S. Marshals, no press release from the Department of Justice. Just whispers. Unfortunate incident. She provoked him. Let it cool off. By noon that day, the nation was on fire with questions, but inside the very system she served, the temperature dropped. Cold silence. Calculated neutrality. Noelle Aragon, a federal judge, had been assaulted in open court, and instead of outrage, the institution offered avoidance. And still, she stood. Noelle had learned young what silence really meant. She was 8 years old the night ICE came for her father, Rodrigo Aragon. He was a farm worker, undocumented but hard-working, who had spent 16 years tending the southern edges of the Rio Grande. He was taken in under moonlight, no warning, no trial, just the dull echo of boots on tile and her mother's screams spilling down the hallway. Her mother, Celia, fought like a wildfire. A civil rights attorney. Celia carried protest signs in one hand and legal briefs in the other. She didn't stop fighting until deportation orders were stamped final. Even then, she never let the fire die. Noelle grew up with that fire, not in books, but in her bones. She became a lawyer, then a prosecutor, then a federal judge, not because she wanted power, but because she wanted to ensure the next little girl didn't have to watch her father disappear into the cracks of America. But now, standing in her chambers, her robe torn at the shoulder and her child asleep upstairs, Noelle realized something terrifying. She was no longer trying to protect others from the cracks. She had fallen into one herself. The punch was only the beginning. After she commanded Rourke's arrest on camera, in front of the entire nation, she thought justice might finally move. She thought the system, shaken by its own public failure, would respond with urgency. But it didn't. Instead, she received a phone call from an unnamed liaison asking if she wanted to take personal time while the investigation played out. She declined. Then came the internal email from the Judicial Oversight Committee, asking her not to speak to the press. She ignored it. When she returned to the bench the following morning, courtroom 4 was half empty. Security was doubled, not to protect her, but to de-escalate further disruptions. The marshals didn't meet her eyes. The clerk's office avoided conversation. Even her own staff moved with careful detachment. Like proximity to her might contaminate their careers, but Noelle had survived worse. At age 17, she stood in a courtroom in El Paso to testify on behalf of a detained mother whose children were being separated across 3 states. She still remembered the judge, white, old, impatient, who told her to speak up. Young lady, or don't speak at all. That was the day she promised herself, I will become the voice no one can silence. Now she had that voice, and she would use it. In the evening, her daughter Lucia, 9 years old, asked her softly while holding a mug of cocoa mama, "Is the man still angry?" Noelle smiled faintly and shook her head. "Angry men don't scare me, mija. They just remind me why I fight." She didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because of the weight of generations, the weight of seeing her father's eyes in her own reflection, the weight of knowing that despite the title, the robe, the courtroom, the law could still turn its back on her if she dared to step out of the expected script. The following day, she submitted a formal motion to reopen People v. Delgado, a suppressed case from 2006 involving a schoolteacher, Mateo Delgado, beaten during a traffic stop. The arresting officer, Caleb Rourke. She already knew what that meant. She was drawing the sword, not just for herself, but for every sealed folder buried in a cabinet labeled sensitive. Mina Patel, her assistant clerk, arrived quietly that afternoon. She placed a USB drive on Noelle's desk, wrapped in a folded note. This contains the raw courtroom feed, the original. I encrypted it. Noelle's fingers trembled not from fear, but from the quiet, defiant bravery behind that act. In a system built on erasure, Mina had chosen preservation. That night, Noelle held a private press conference. No podium, no courthouse flags. Just her, seated, with a single spotlight and one microphone. "The man who struck me," she said, "wasn't just swinging at a judge. He was swinging at the idea that someone like me could wear this robe in the first place. And when the system says nothing, when it shrinks back, instead of standing up, it swings right alongside him." The next morning, her chambers received over 200 messages, some anonymous, some threatening. One included a picture of Lucia walking home from school, circled in red marker. Noelle didn't flinch. She installed cameras, changed locks, not because she was afraid, but because she was preparing for war. She knew, with clarity sharper than any blade, this was no longer about one man's violence. This was about the system's silence. And she would not be silent. Not now, not ever. In the days that followed, old names re-emerged. Victims once disbelieved came forward. Journalists began digging. Hashtags bloomed, "Our Justice with Noelle." "We stand with her." Hammer break the silence. But inside the marble corridors of justice, the air stayed cold. Her fellow judges called her brave in private, but none stood beside her in public. The Federal Oversight Board delayed its response. The district chief's memo used phrases like "review ongoing" and "pending outcome." She was alone. And yet, she was not. Because every bruise she carried had history behind it. Every word she spoke carried the voices of people denied microphones. Every move she made carried the weight of two worlds, the one that built her, and the one that tried to break her. Judge Noelle Aragon wasn't fighting to restore her authority. She was fighting to redefine it. And in that courtroom, on that morning, in front of millions, when she ordered that arrest and said, "Keep the cameras rolling," she didn't just make a command, she made a promise that the next punch would not land in silence, because the survivor had become the storm, and the system had just been put on trial. When the punch landed, Mina Patel didn't scream. She didn't cry or flinch. She just stood frozen behind the clerk's desk, fingers still poised over the keys she'd been typing on moments before, heart thudding in her chest like a warning bell. But it wasn't the violence that terrified her, not exactly. It was the silence that followed. It was the way the security team hesitated before moving. The way the live stream feed blinked once, twice, then went dark for 6 full seconds. 6 seconds that told her more than any official memo ever could. Mina had worked inside the federal courthouse for nearly 7 years. She was meticulous, quiet, and deeply observant, the kind of person who remembered badge numbers, who double-checked timestamp logs, who noticed when files went missing or names were quietly removed from distribution lists. And because she was small, brown-skinned, and never raised her voice, people often underestimated her. That suited her fine. It gave her space to see what others didn't. So when Judge Aragon stood, blood trailing from her cheek, and ordered Rourke's arrest with a voice that didn't shake, Mina didn't move to help. Not yet. She moved instead toward the auxiliary feed port beneath the bench. Quietly, deliberately, Her hand slid into the drawer where she kept her personal hard drive, a black rectangle with an old sticker on the back that read, "Truth is a form of resistance." Within 10 seconds, she connected it. The system pinged. She began copying. What she downloaded was the unedited courtroom footage from 9:15 to 10:30 a.m., including the build-up, the punch, the arrest, and the aftermath. Every camera angle, every decibel of gasped silence. She didn't tell anyone, not even Judge Aragon, especially not Judge Aragon, because Mina had grown up knowing how truth disappears. She'd seen it firsthand. In the summer of 2010, her older brother Amar, 19 at the time, was stopped by police 3 blocks from their home in Sugar Land. He was walking home from his shift at the gas station. 2 officers claimed he matched a suspect description. A brief confrontation turned violent. Amar came home with a broken wrist, 2 fractured ribs, and a citation for resisting arrest. Their family filed a complaint. It was quietly dismissed. Lack of credible evidence, the paperwork said. No available footage. Mina remembered the day Internal Affairs sent their final letter just 3 weeks after the incident. No further action to be taken. She remembered the way her mother tore it in half without saying a word. That silence had stayed with her ever since. So when Caleb Rourke threw that punch, something deeper than fear ignited in Mina. It wasn't just shock, it was recognition. She knew men like him didn't act spontaneously. They acted because they knew they'd be covered, because they had been before, because there were systems layered, subtle, deliberate, built to preserve their power and erase their harm. That night, Mina stayed in the office past 10 p.m. She locked the door, dimmed the lights, put her headphones in, and she started digging. The courthouse database wasn't easy to navigate, but Mina knew its back doors. She had access as a systems liaison, a role few understood and even fewer paid attention to. She cross-referenced Rourke's name with sealed internal affairs files. Then she narrowed the search by complaint type: excessive force, racial bias, use of restraint during non-violent incidents. The results loaded slowly, like the system itself was reluctant to reveal what had been hidden. She found 12 cases, 12 internal investigations into Officer Caleb Rourke over the span of 15 years, all closed, none prosecuted. 8 involved Black or Latino men under the age of 30. 4 referenced inconclusive body cam footage. 3 had complaints filed by hospital staff after victims were admitted for injuries inconsistent with the arrest records. Then she saw it. Case ID 81479A filed June 2010. Complainant Mina Patel. Her breath caught. The report was thin, just 2 pages. A brief summary, Rourke's statement, and a standard closure memo. But there, buried in the metadata, she saw the truth. The original file had included 3 attachments: a medical report, a witness statement from a neighbor, and a digital image file. All 3 had been deleted within 48 hours of submission. The deletion request was signed not by Internal Affairs, but by a district supervisor in the same precinct Rourke had served in. Mina closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair, heart pounding like thunder in a bottle. All these years, her brother had never talked about that night again. He'd buried it, like the system had asked him to. But now the threads were unraveling. She didn't hesitate. She printed everything: metadata sheets, deletion logs, timestamps. Then she encrypted the folder under the name Rourke Vault Truth and saved 3 separate copies, one to her private cloud, one to her encrypted flash drive, and one to a secure whistleblower drop box used by independent journalists. The next morning, she handed a sealed envelope to Judge Aragon. She said nothing, just placed it on her desk and left the room. Noelle opened it in silence. Inside a note that read, "You may not want to know all of this, but the country needs to." Mina had made her choice. She wasn't just a clerk anymore. She was a custodian of truth. By noon, whispers had started leaking through courthouse walls. Rumors about Rourke's past, the sealed cases, the missing footage. Mina knew they were watching her now. Her system logins were flagged. Her access was restricted. 2 unfamiliar men loitered near her car in the parking lot. She didn't flinch, because once you carry truth, there's no turning back. Later that evening, Mina received a text from an unknown number. It read, "Leave it alone, for your sake." She took a screenshot, filed it in the folder, labeled it Threat 001 by midnight. She'd found 2 more erased cases, one involving a deaf teenager in 2013, another involving a veteran with PTSD in 2016. Both had been dismissed. Both had Officer Rourke listed as the responding officer. Both had medical complaints filed days later that were never investigated. Mina wasn't hunting anymore. She was unearthing, and for the first time, she realized what Judge Aragon had known all along. This wasn't about a rogue cop. It was about a pattern, a hidden, deliberate pattern of violence, denial, and institutional silence. And now, it had a name, and a witness, and evidence, and the woman who had always worked in the background was stepping into the light. She wasn't asking for attention. She wasn't doing it for glory. She was doing it for Amar, for Delgado, for the boy in the missing footage, for the stories that had been redacted and forgotten. She was doing it because she knew the system could only survive if the evidence stayed buried. And she was the one digging it back up, one file at a time, one truth at a time, one act of courage that would not be deleted. The footage had gone viral. The punch had been replayed over 20 million times in less than 48 hours. Cable news anchors parsed it frame by frame like it was the Zapruder film of judicial defiance. The blood on Judge Noelle Aragon's face wasn't just evidence, it was symbolism. The robe she wore, stained and unmended, became a banner. But behind every surge of public outrage, there is always a countercurrent, a shadow machinery rushing to plug the leak before the dam bursts. That machinery had a name, District Attorney Henry Kellerman. Kellerman was the kind of man who spoke in clipped sentences and thought in risk matrices. He didn't believe in justice, he believed in stability. In 27 years of service, he had never once lost a case that reached trial. Of course, that's because very few ever did. His specialty wasn't prosecution, it was prevention. He killed cases in conference rooms, not courtrooms. Buried them under piles of lack of compelling evidence and insufficient public interest. He called them quiet wins. Others called them cover-ups. He called Officer Caleb Rourke one of the department's more complicated assets. The public didn't know what that meant, but those within the legal circuit understood perfectly Rourke was useful. Dangerous, but useful. He took the rough calls. He ran interference in political neighborhoods. He kept certain donors and stakeholders calm, so long as his name stayed out of the press. And Kellerman had kept it that way for years, until now. The morning after Mina Patel uncovered the sealed complaint involving her brother, Kellerman's office was flooded with calls. Journalists, advocacy groups, congressional staffers. Even a late-night voicemail from a federal oversight board asking politely how his office had missed 12 abuse complaints against the same officer. He didn't flinch. He had survived worse. But what made his pulse quicken was not the headlines. It was the motion to reopen Delgado vs. Rourke sitting on his desk, freshly filed by Judge Aragon. It wasn't just old. It was radioactive. That case, buried in 2006, had nearly caused a civil lawsuit against the city until it was quietly settled under sealed terms. Noelle Aragon reopening it meant more than judicial independence. It meant war. By 10 a.m., he was sitting across from her in her chambers. He came alone, no aides, no notes, just a flat leather folder and a face polished for damage control. "Noelle," he began, dropping her title with the ease of an old mentor. "You've been through a lot. Nobody blames you for being angry." She didn't answer, just poured herself coffee and let the silence stretch like wire between them. "I saw the footage," he said, glancing down. "Tragic. Inexcusable. But we have to be careful now. Emotions are high, and the city's watching." She leaned forward slightly, voice low. "And what exactly are they watching for, Henry? For me to sit down and go quiet?" Kellerman smiled thinly. "They're watching to see if you'll choose leadership. Or chaos." There it was, the old bait. The language of order, not truth. He always knew how to frame obstruction as wisdom. "I'm offering you a path here," he continued. "We can reassign the Rourke investigation, slow roll the proceedings, let the temperature cool. In 6 weeks, things will look different. We'll issue a statement. You can even write it." "You mean bury it again," she said flatly. He didn't deny it. "Look," he said, voice softening into faux compassion. "The Delgado case is 2 decades old. Witnesses are scattered. Testimony's weak. There's no angle where this plays clean. It's not supposed to play clean." She shot back. "It's supposed to play honest." Kellerman looked at her like she'd just spoken a language he'd forgotten how to understand. "Noelle, you've got a daughter?" he said, changing tactics. "You think this circus won't affect her? Do you know how many people are watching your every move right now? How many friends you've already lost without realizing it?" "I don't need friends," she said. "I need answers." And that's when Kellerman's tone changed. The smile faded. The warmth drained from his voice like water slipping through a crack. "You think you're winning right now," he said. "But you're not. You're building a pyre, and you're the one standing in the middle." She stood, robe swaying gently. "Then I'll burn for the right reason." He stood too. The folder in his hand remained closed. Whatever deal he came to offer had died on her desk. Later that day, Mina walked into Noelle's office with another file. This one contained a chain of internal emails metadata recovered from courthouse backups. At the top, from Kellerman, doffice.gov. Subject: Optics Management. The body of the email was short. "Bryant and Rourke incidents pose liability. Recommend consolidation or closure for community optics. Maintain narrative control." Beneath it, several case numbers were listed. One of them was Delgado. Another was Mina Patel's. Noelle stared at the paper. Her hands steady, but her throat tight. "He never intended to prosecute them," she said aloud. Mina nodded. "He did the math, silenced the math." The media learned of the meeting within hours. Someone, maybe from the courthouse, maybe not, leaked the memo to a journalist. By nightfall, Kellerman was giving a brief statement on the courthouse steps, claiming his office had always acted in good faith and that, Optics was standard terminology for community engagement strategy. No one believed him. Not this time. A protest gathered outside his office the next morning. 300 people. Then 600. Signs reading, "Justice doesn't need optics. Prosecute the protectors." And Kellerman knew filled the air. Kellerman stayed behind closed doors. By the third day, 2 whistleblowers came forward, junior staffers from his office. One had been asked to shred files. Another said she'd been told, "Keep your head down." Rourke's untouchable. In public. Kellerman held the line. But inside, the armor cracked. He called Noelle again, this time at home. She didn't answer. The message he left was short. "We're both going to lose if you keep pushing." She deleted it, because Noelle no longer believed in the logic of winning. She believed in exposure. And Kellerman, once the gatekeeper of silence, was finally being dragged into the light. And Mina, who had once been a file clerk, a note-taker, a background presence, now stood with hard evidence in her hands, and a clear voice in the press briefing the following morning. This wasn't about lack of evidence, she said. It was about too many people deciding evidence didn't matter. Kellerman's fall wouldn't be immediate. Systems like his don't collapse overnight. But the chain had been broken, and the engine of the cover-up oiled for years by backroom deals. Euphemisms, and fear had stalled. The reckoning had begun, and it was loud. The folder was thin, almost insultingly so. 3 yellowing pages, a redacted witness form, and a half-filled medical report that smelled like it had been buried beneath dust and indifference for nearly 20 years. But when Judge Noelle Aragon slid it from the stack Mina handed her, something inside her chest shifted. The name at the top wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it hit her like a second punch, this one deeper, older, buried in blood and memory. Complainant Mateo Delgado. Date May 16th, 2006. Occupation middle school science teacher. Incident type injury sustained during traffic stop. Officer involved. C. Rourke. She stared at the line, blinked, then read it again. Mateo. Her cousin. Her blood. She hadn't seen his name in years, not since that summer. The summer her family stopped talking. The summer where everything got hushed. Noelle leaned back in her chair, robe draped around her shoulders like armor starting to crack. The office around her seemed to fade, walls flattening, voices muting. All she could hear now was her mother's voice from nearly 20 years earlier. Brittle and furious. They got him, just like your father. Different uniform, same silence. She had been in law school back then, busy, drowning in readings, detached. She remembered getting the call from her aunt that Mateo had fallen during a confrontation with police, that he was in the hospital. He was quiet about it, said he slipped on gravel. But the way his back was hunched after that, the way he never stood straight again, she always knew something wasn't right. But she hadn't asked. Not really. She didn't want to know. Until now. Now the file sat before her, stained with redacted ink and institutional cowardice. And now she knew the officer who had nearly broken Mateo's spine was the same man who had struck her in court. Caleb Rourke. It wasn't coincidence. It was pattern. Deliberate. Cold. Systemic. She reached for her phone and called her aunt. No answer. She tried again. This time, Mateo picked up. "Hey," his voice said, slow and cautious. Noelle, she hadn't spoken to him in years. Not really. A few family dinners, holiday texts, but nothing like this. "I found the file," she said. No preamble. From 2006. The stop. The injury. I know it was Rourke. A long silence on the line. She could hear his breath. I was told to let it go, he said finally. Told I'd never win. I was a brown man driving a used Ford in the wrong zip code. He dragged me out of the car before I could even show my ID. Her throat tightened. Why didn't you tell me you were becoming a judge? He said. Gently. I didn't want to be the reason you got distracted. I didn't want you to think the system was broken before you even got a chance to sit on the bench. The irony cut so deep, she nearly dropped the phone. He continued. They gave me a choice file quietly and risk losing my job, or take the settlement and sign the non-disclosure. I took the second option. Thought I could still teach, still live. Can you? She whispered. I walk crooked now, he replied. But yeah, I live, just not how I planned. That night, Noelle couldn't sleep. She sat in her study until almost 3 a.m, poring over the details, what little there were. The stop was logged as a routine checkpoint, but there was no checkpoint documented that day. The body cam logs were accidentally overwritten, and Rourke's report claimed non-compliance. Mateo, who'd never been arrested, never carried a weapon, and had been driving home from a school supply store, was accused of aggressive posturing. He'd spent 6 days in the hospital, and the case had been sealed by the DA's office by Henry Kellerman less than 2 weeks later. Now, the pieces clicked into place like a weapon being loaded. Rourke hadn't lost control in her courtroom. He'd never been in control, because he never needed to be. There was always someone ready to clean up after him. Someone like Kellerman. Someone like a precinct commander who valued headlines over accountability. Someone like the deputy, who once told her as a young prosecutor. Some people need to be handled off paper. And now, her own family had been one of the names erased off paper. Suddenly, her crusade was no longer rooted in duty. It was tangled in her own DNA. She remembered Mateo as a kid, always organizing things, lining up his crayons by spectrum, teaching her how to build a baking soda volcano for third-grade science fair. His dream was to run a planetarium someday, to teach kids about stars instead of teaching cops what fear looks like. And here he was, spine still crooked, from a truth the world had refused to carry, a truth she had refused to ask about. Until now, the next morning. Noelle called a press conference. This time, she didn't wear a robe. She wore a black suit and a single silver pin, her father's. The one he used to wear during union meetings. The room was packed, microphones lined up like artillery. I have an announcement, she said into the glare of flashing cameras. I am reopening the case of Mateo Delgado. Gasps rippled. Cameras pivoted. This isn't a case of new evidence. The evidence was always there. It was buried, sealed, silenced. Officer Rourke's name appears on too many complaints. And in this case, it appears in my family. I recused myself from the bench for this one, not because I'm afraid to stand, but because I want to stand freely, not as Judge Aragon, but as someone who believes the justice system must answer for every name it tried to forget. That evening, she called Mateo again, told him what she'd done. I don't want revenge, he said. You won't get it, she replied. You'll get something better. What's that truth? Out loud, in public. With your name fully restored, for the first time in years. Her cousin didn't sound tired. The case file that had once fit in a manila envelope was now front-page news, and what had once been just an archive of pain had become the blueprint for a movement. Noelle Aragon knew the war she was fighting could take everything from her. But it had already taken from Mateo. And she wasn't going to let that stand. Not anymore. It started with a photograph, delivered in a plain white envelope, slipped under her office door sometime between her morning case review and the clerk's coffee break. No return address, no note inside, just a single. Glossy 4x6 image her daughter Lucia, 9 years old, walking home from school, backpack slung over one shoulder, sneakers untied, the shadow of a parked car stretching across the sidewalk behind her like a warning. On the back, written in block letters with a black marker, "She shouldn't pay for your crusade." Noelle's fingers trembled as she held it, not from panic, but from the ice spreading in her chest. She had seen many things in her life: deportation orders, assault records, autopsy photos, protest footage. But nothing chilled her like that image, because this wasn't a threat aimed at her. This was a message for her heart. It came just 48 hours after she'd announced the reopening of the Delgado case, and less than 1 week since she'd exposed the connection between Officer Caleb Rourke and 12 sealed abuse complaints, including the one that crippled her cousin. The backlash was immediate and coordinated. First came the bank alert, a call from her financial institution early Tuesday morning. Her account had been frozen due to suspicious login attempts from multiple international IPs. When she asked for a location, the voice on the other end hesitated, then muttered, "I'm sorry. Judge Aragon, we're not authorized to share that information." She pressed. They deflected. Later that day, her court-issued laptop crashed, mid-draft of a motion. When IT examined it, they found 3 hidden processes running in the background tracking keystrokes, accessing encrypted folders. None of them had been authorized. None could be traced. Then came the surveillance device discovered behind the bookshelf in her home study. A tiny black cylinder, no bigger than a pencil eraser, hidden behind a hardcover copy of Civil Liberties in Crisis. Her daughter had knocked over the book by accident. "Mama," Lucia had said innocently, "your book has a light on it." That's when Noelle knew. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even call the police. She took pictures, bagged the device, logged the time, 7:23 p.m. She created a digital folder on a personal hard drive titled Retaliation 1 and began to fill it, because she understood something now. Something her father once whispered to her when ice dragged him away under a July moon. They don't just want your silence. They want your surrender. And Noelle Aragon would not surrender, but she would prepare for war. She reached out to 3 people she trusted with her life, not fellow judges, not public officials, real people. A journalist named Leticia Kwan, who once exposed a wrongful conviction ring in North Carolina. A digital security expert named Dom Esparza, who had worked for the ACLU before disappearing from the public eye. And Mina Patel, her assistant clerk, who had now become more of a co-conspirator in the pursuit of truth than any legal aid ever had. They met off-record, in a private office beneath a public library, its lease registered to a dormant nonprofit. "This is more than backlash," Dom said, analyzing the surveillance data. "It's targeted suppression, government-grade software, possibly federal contractors, rogue units. You're not just rattling a cage, you've torn the door off it." Leticia was more blunt. "They're scared of you. Noelle, scared enough to poke the bear. which means you're getting close to something no one ever wanted in the daylight. Noelle showed them the photo of Lucia. Neither spoke. They just nodded and took copies. The psychological toll was mounting. She was exhausted. Sleep came in fragments. Her phone buzzed with anonymous texts at 2 in the morning. One just said, "TikTok." Another, "Know your limits." But through it all, Noelle documented everything. Every call, every glitch, every folder that suddenly became inaccessible on her court network. She didn't trust the legal chain anymore. She trusted paper, voice recordings, flash drives hidden inside cereal boxes. She also began noticing people following her. Not always the same face, but the same feeling. The same nondescript cars parked 2 spaces behind hers in the courthouse garage. The same man with the faded ball cap always pretending to scroll his phone near her building entrance. Still, she didn't flinch. Not because she wasn't afraid. She was afraid. But fear is a tool, and Noelle had learned to use it. She took Lucia out of school and moved her temporarily to a friend's home 3 cities over. Noelle told her it was a girl's vacation. "But why don't you smile?" Mama Lucia asked one night, while Noelle braided her hair in silence. "Because," Noelle replied softly, "some fights make you strong, even before you win them." That night, she stayed up till nearly 4 a.m., organizing digital files, printing duplicates, encrypting drives. She created a multi-part archive titled Truth Cascade, with every piece of buried evidence tied to Rourke, Kellerman, and 3 unnamed individuals connected through sealed memos and flagged courthouse emails. She also wrote her in case something happens letter a document addressed to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, naming names, citing evidence, and requesting protection for her daughter and key witnesses. She sent it to 6 separate outlets, all with the subject line, "If I disappear." This is why. But she didn't disappear. She showed up to court. She spoke on panels. She walked through the courthouse doors knowing they were watching. She sat on the bench with her back straight and her voice clear. And in doing so, she became something more than a judge, more than a symbol. She became proof that even under threat, even when institutions crumble, one person's refusal to back down could become a wildfire. Noelle Aragon was being hunted, but she had already chosen her ground, and she would not be moved. The day the public inquiry opened, the air in the courthouse felt heavier, like it knew it was about to be purged. Lines wrapped around the marble columns by 7 o'clock in the morning, as news crews set up outside in waves, their tripods locked and ready. Inside, Courtroom 7, the largest in the Houston Federal Building, had been converted into a temporary hearing chamber, not for sentencing, not for criminal prosecution, but for something older, deeper reckoning. Judge Noelle Aragon didn't sit behind the bench that morning. She sat in front of it, not as a presiding judge, not cloaked in the authority of black robes, but as a witness, a woman, a mother, a citizen who had been silenced, threatened, surveilled, and who had chosen to speak anyway. The inquiry had been greenlit just 5 days earlier after the Office of Special Legal Oversight received more than 20,000 citizen signatures and 3 leaked memos exposing systemic suppression of misconduct complaints within the Houston Police Department, many of them connected to one name, Caleb Rourke. But what ignited it wasn't just the paperwork, it was the footage and the hashtags. The photo of Lucia, with the caption, "She shouldn't pay for your crusade," had been leaked anonymously and sparked a storm. Within 24 hours, the tag, "Protect Lucia," surged to #1 on social media. It quickly merged with older movements, #Justice for Mateo, #Rourke Files, Break the silence. Survivors began posting anonymously, then publicly. Grainy cell phone clips surfaced. Medical bills, written statements, court dates with no closure. By the time Noelle stepped up to the microphone, the weight of more than 15 years of buried voices sat in the room like a crowd all its own. The inquiry chair, a retired judge from Atlanta named Howard Reeves, welcomed her with the formality of someone who knew history was watching. But Noelle didn't speak with formality. She spoke with fire cooled into clarity. "I was struck by an officer sworn to uphold the law," she began. But what struck deeper was the silence after. Because that silence didn't start with me. It started long before with the one no one listened to. She paused. "I'm here today not because I want justice for myself. I'm here because we need to understand how many voices were buried, so someone like Rourke could rise." One by one, survivors took the floor. A man named David Rowland, now in his early 30s, testified that he was 17 when Rourke tackled him outside a corner store in South Houston. He was carrying a skateboard and a bag of groceries. No charges were ever filed. He was hospitalized with a concussion. His mother filed a complaint. It was never returned. A woman named Lena Torres, a veteran and former EMT, described being pulled over for a broken taillight in 2014. She was ordered out of the car, slammed against the hood, and cuffed for non-compliance. She told the inquiry that Rourke called her a liability in uniform before shoving her into the back seat. "I kept thinking," Lena said through tears, "this wasn't supposed to happen to someone who served. But then I realized it was supposed to happen to me. Because people like me were made invisible before we ever wore the uniform." Their testimonies weren't just emotional. They were evidentiary. Mina Patel had prepared files, dozens of them, each matched to an incident once labeled inconclusive or unverified. Now, in the light of day and on national television, they were matched to names, faces, scars, stories. The press sat riveted. Social media feeds were flooded with live-stream reactions. Quote, threads, digital sketches of survivors testifying. News anchors stumbled through their own narratives, trying to balance their long-standing admiration for law enforcement with the rising tide of truth. One particular clip went viral within minutes. Mateo Delgado, quiet and humble, took the microphone. His voice cracked only once. "I didn't ask to become part of this," he said. "But I'm done being ashamed of surviving." He held up a small, bent piece of metal. "This is the screw they put in my spine," he said. "I kept it after the second surgery. I used to see it as the thing that broke me. But now I see it as the thing that reminds me I'm still standing." Noelle watched from her seat, hands clasped, heart burning with pride and pain. Every word spoken that day pushed another crack through the shield wall, this invisible armor that had protected Rourke and men like him for decades. Each voice shattered the myth of isolated misconduct. This wasn't a few bad apples. This was an orchard fed by denial. The final testimony of the day came from a surprise witness, Assistant DA Ethan Monroe, a former junior prosecutor who once worked under Henry Kellerman. He walked in, trembling, clutching a flash drive in one hand. "I was told to bury cases," he said, eyes glassy, to tweak language, to delay subpoenas. "I was part of it. I was part of the machine." He handed the flash drive to the inquiry panel. On it, email chains, draft dismissals, and internal memos, some with Kellerman's name, others with initials traced back to senior police officials. It was the nail in the coffin. As he finished, Monroe turned to Noelle. "I'm sorry," he said. "You asked questions we should have asked a decade ago." She didn't respond. She just nodded. It was enough. That night, the footage of the inquiry played on every major network. Millions tuned in. Bars streamed it like a playoff game. Schools paused classes to discuss it. And Noelle, though weary, knew something irreversible had happened. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a rupture, a crack in the silence, a tear in the fabric, a voice, no longer trembling, saying, "We were here, we were hurt, and now we are heard." For the first time in a long time, Noelle returned home not to prepare for another defense, but to breathe, to sit beside Lucia on the couch, arms wrapped around her daughter, and whisper a truth she'd waited years to believe. "It's working," she said. "The truth is working, and outside, across the city, across the country, across thousands of screens." A chorus answered back loud, fierce and finally free. The shield wall had cracked. Now it crumbled. Less than 72 hours after the public inquiry ended, the subpoenas began to land. First, they came in thick manila envelopes marked U.S. District Subpoena. Immediate response required. Then, they arrived in person, hand-delivered by U.S. Marshals, who stood silently as top city officials opened their doors and found justice waiting. The list read like a who's who of protected Power 3 internal affairs officers, 2 deputy police commissioners, a state-level auditor, and former Houston Police Chief Warren Castor, the man who had once called Caleb Rourke a model of field excellence. It was no longer just about Rourke. It was about the machine that built him, fed him, armored him, and now, for the first time, that machine was being dragged into the light with its bolts exposed and its blueprints leaking. The walls of denial didn't fall all at once. They buckled, slowly, under pressure, under truth. The biggest collapse came on a Wednesday afternoon, when District Attorney Henry Kellerman stepped into a press room already thick with the scent of scandal. His once impeccable suit looked rumpled. The color had drained from his face. For 27 years, he had been the man behind closed doors, the fixer, the whisperer. But now, his own words had risen from the grave in the form of 82 leaked emails, released by whistleblowers and confirmed by Mina Patel's data recovery team. One message read, "Push Rourke's case to the bottom of the docket. Too much heat this quarter. Prioritize political optics." Another, "Tell Patel to stand down on the Delgado file. That one's cold. Let it stay that way." There was no speech, no attempt to salvage his reputation. Kellerman simply read a prepared statement. Voice wooden, jaw tight. "I hereby tender my resignation. Effective immediately." Then he walked out. No questions taken. The city watched in stunned silence. But not Noelle Aragon. She was already 3 steps ahead. She sat in the courtroom turned investigation chamber, eyes fixed forward, surrounded by screens filled with evidence, statements, and maps. Not judicial maps. Maps of cover-ups. And at the center of them all stood Mina Patel, no longer a background clerk, no longer a quiet observer. Now, she was the system's archivist of reckoning, armed not with titles, but with timelines, metadata, and receipts, under oath. Mina laid it all out. She moved through 12 separate cases involving Caleb Rourke, each one sealed, each one closed under dubious claims, one by one. She connected the dots the complaints filed and vanished. the evidence submitted, then scrubbed. The victims gaslit into silence. Each pin on her digital board lit up with dates, names, and signatures of men who now found themselves subpoenaed, sweating in back rooms, trying to explain why 12 pieces of truth had been locked away. And then came the final revelation. Mina pulled up a folder labeled Shadow Files. In it were not just the names of victims, but notes on internal protocol used to identify liability officers within the department. Rourke had been flagged 7 times. Each time, the system didn't discipline him. It buried the flag, reassigned him, promoted him. He wasn't a rogue cop, Mina said clearly. He was a tool, a weapon they knew how to aim. And when he fired in public, they blamed the bullet, not the hand that loaded the gun. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The inquiry panel leaned in. Noelle watched from her seat, jaw clenched. She felt pride raw and searing for the woman who had once handed her files in silence and now delivered testimony that turned the city's stomach. But there was grief, too. For every name Mina mentioned, for every life filed under optics instead of justice. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, Chief Castor was arrested for obstruction of justice and destruction of official records. 2 internal affairs officers were suspended pending investigation. A third fled the state, triggering an interagency warrant, and a senior city council member resigned. After it was revealed he had pushed funding into the public relations cleanup division attached to the police union. What had once been a courtroom drama was now a government-wide purge. Noelle returned to the courthouse not as a target, but as a signal. The public lined the steps to greet her, not with chants or cheers, but with silence and respect. Some held signs, "Truth has a name," "Mother, Judge, Witness." This is what courage looks like. Inside, she addressed the press. The justice system doesn't collapse all at once, she said. It fractures quietly. It folds under favors, political shielding, delayed reports. Today, those fractures are exposed, and from them, we can finally begin to rebuild. She paused, then added, not in private, not behind closed doors, but out here, where everyone can see. Her words swept across social media like a second wave. Institution on Trial began trending alongside #Mina, testified, and Kellerman resigned. Editorials exploded across the country, asking what other cities might have shield walls like Houston's and who might be brave enough to break them next. What no one saw, what no one could possibly know, was the moment Noelle returned to her office that evening, sat down in the silence, and finally exhaled. It wasn't over. There were still more files to open, more names to unseal. But the worst part was done. The silence was broken. The system wasn't healed. But it was wounded and visible. And that, to Noelle, meant hope. For the first time in years. Truth wasn't something she had to fight to speak. It was being listened to. Publicly. Unequivocally. She glanced at the photo of Lucia on her desk, the real one, not the threat. Smiling, carefree, holding a stuffed bear they won at the county fair, and whispered, "We're not safe yet." But now, they're the ones afraid, outside. The lights of the city blinked on, street by street, building by building, and somewhere in the dark, the old machine of silence sputtered, stalled, and began to die. The verdict came on a Monday. It was just after 11 in the morning when the jury returned to courtroom 7. Their faces pale, their posture stiff with the weight of something irreversible. The room had fallen into breathless stillness, the kind of stillness that comes before thunder. And when the foreperson read the words, "Guilty on all counts," a sharp current cut through the air like a collective exhale, followed by a silence so deep it felt sacred. Caleb Rourke, once shielded by badge and power, was now convicted of civil rights violations, excessive force, obstruction, and retaliatory intimidation. The courtroom did not erupt. There were no cheers, no applause, just a silence made of something heavier. Vindication wrapped in grief. Noelle Aragon sat in the front row, not in robes, not at a podium, but among the people watching the same man who had once dared to strike her in court, now watch his future close around him like prison bars. She didn't smile, because there was nothing sweet about it. This wasn't a victory. This was a necessary wound. A wound that had taken nearly 20 years and a cascade of voices to bring into the open. And though justice had finally spoken, its tone was not triumphant, it was solemn, like a eulogy for a system that had buried too many names in the margins. The sentencing would come later. Years, maybe decades, behind bars. But Noelle had already turned her focus elsewhere. Because even as Rourke was led away in cuffs, even as media outlets scrambled for breaking headlines, and survivors held each other in trembling silence, Noelle knew the real work had just begun. That evening, standing beneath a storm-gray sky, she walked up the courthouse steps once more, not to prosecute, not to defend, but to rebuild. With her beside her stood survivors, whistleblowers, journalists, and organizers, each of them scarred, none of them silent. There, she announced the launch of Ashes to Light, a judicial reform coalition built not on theory, but on lived truth. Its mission was simple and uncompromising: transparency in court investigations, open data on police misconduct, mandatory public tracking of sealed cases, and an independent oversight board not beholden to prosecutors or politics. This isn't about vengeance, Noelle told the crowd. This is about vision. If the law can strike without being seen, it cannot be trusted. So we'll make it visible. Every file, every motion, every redacted line. No more shadows. The name Ashes to Light came from something Mateo Delgado once said during the inquiry. When asked how he kept going after his injury, he'd replied, "You can bury a fire in ashes, but that doesn't mean it's dead. Sometimes, all it takes is one breath to bring it back." And now, the breath had been taken. Membership in the coalition surged within days. Retired judges, legal interns, community leaders, and public defenders from cities as far as Chicago and Oakland signed on. A database prototype was already in beta. Testimonies from new whistleblowers flowed in for every truth that had once been silenced. 10 more voices now stepped forward to carry it. But for Noelle, reform wasn't measured in headlines or downloads. It was measured in what remained quietly protected, what no longer had to be hidden, what children didn't have to fear. And that's why, just days after the verdict, she found herself sitting on the porch of her small home at the edge of the city. The sun hadn't yet broken through the gray, but the horizon was lightening soft and slow, like the first breath after a long night. Beside her, wrapped in a fleece blanket with sleep still clinging to her eyes, sat Lucia. Her legs swung gently beneath the wooden bench. A mug of hot cocoa steamed between her palms. Untouched. They didn't speak for a long time. Birds stirred in the distance. A soft wind rustled the trees. Somewhere a delivery truck growled down a waking street. But on the porch, there was only stillness. Then, Lucia looked up. "Mama," she said, voice small but certain. "Did we win?" Noelle turned to her, searching for the answer she wished she could give, one that was clean, easy. The kind parents give to let children sleep peacefully. But she couldn't lie. Not now. Not after everything. She brushed a strand of hair behind Lucia's ear and replied quietly, "We didn't win." But the silence lost. Lucia didn't nod, didn't smile, but she leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. And that was enough. Behind them, inside the house. A new stack of files waited on Noelle's desk. New cases, new stories, new voices in need of light. But for that moment, beneath a pale dawn, Noelle allowed herself stillness, not because the fight was over, but because the world had changed. Not in shouts, but in truth. In names remembered, in evidence revealed, in systems cracked open like old books and finally read aloud. And in the quiet defiance of a woman who chose not to look away, who took the punch, stood back up, and made the system see itself. No, justice hadn't won. Not fully. But silence, for the first time in a very long time, had finally lost. What happened in that Houston courtroom wasn't just a legal battle, it was a national wake-up call. In the span of just 3 weeks, we saw the collapse of a shield that had protected corruption for nearly 20 years. We watched a decorated officer, once untouchable, be convicted not only by evidence, but by courage. We witnessed Judge Noelle Aragon bleed on the floor, rise without fear, and turn personal trauma into public truth. And in that rise, we saw the reflection of every silenced voice, every Mateo, every Lucia, every citizen who was told their pain wasn't credible, their case wasn't winnable, their story wasn't safe to tell. But now, it is. Now. The lesson is clear. Justice doesn't move unless people push it. You watching this are that push. These stories aren't just headlines. They're blueprints. They teach us that silence protects no one. That democracy is not something we inherit. It's something we defend. One voice, one file, one stand at a time. If we want real change in America, we must demand it where it matters most in our courts, our police stations, and our communities. Every vote counts. Every testimony matters. Every whisper of truth has the power to crack a wall built on denial. But only if we keep the pressure alive. So here's what you can do right now. Click like to boost this story. Click share to make sure others hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel so you never miss the stories that matter. Because this isn't entertainment. This is a movement. And movements don't thrive in silence. They grow in the light. Let's make sure the next Rourke doesn't get protected. Let's make sure the next Noelle doesn't have to bleed to be believed. It's been said that justice delayed is justice denied. But if we stand together, justice won't be delayed again. We owe it to our children. We owe it to those still afraid to speak. And we owe it to ourselves. So be part of this. Be loud. Be relentless. Be the reason the silence keeps losing. Hit subscribe and keep this truth alive.